All right, so you sent us a pretty interesting mix of stuff here about big tech. And it looks like we're really focusing on Elon Musk and Peter Thiel.
Right.
We've got blog posts, news articles, even some jokes, even excerpts from a book. But the thing that really sticks out to me is that you're interested in this paradox that they represent.
Yeah.
These champions of freedom who also hold a ton of control.
Yeah, it is interesting. They're trying to like unshackle us with technology, but then they build these empires that rely on data collection and influencing public discourse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to untangle this whole thing with big tech freedom and control?
Well, I mean, a good place to start would be with their backgrounds and companies, since those are featured so heavily in what you sent.
Okay.
We could start with Thiel, for example. Early investor in Facebook, co-founded PayPal.
Right.
Even backed Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker Media.
Wow.
But then there's Palantir Technologies.
And that's where things get really interesting, because it's not like your average Silicon Valley startup that's just looking for the next viral app.
Right.
They specialize in data analytics. But a lot of their clientele are government agencies like Homeland Security and immigration and customs enforcement, supplying these powerful tools for surveillance.
And that's a big part of why people are concerned about privacy. I mean, one of these articles even mentions a German court case that stopped Palantir software because of privacy violations.
Wow.
It's one thing to collect data,
Right.
but how that information is analyzed and potentially used, and then the lack of transparency about their algorithms.
Right. It feels very much like a black box.
Yeah.
Where we don't actually know what's happening. We just know what goes in and what comes out.
Right. How can you trust that something that powerful won't be misused?
Right. And it's not just about what's being collected, but who has access to it.
Exactly.
And speaking of access and potential conflicts of interest, our sources mention Thiel's support for politicians whose views don't always align with the LGBTQ community.
Right.
Which he himself is a member of.
Yeah. It's a complicated situation for sure, and it definitely adds another layer to the discussion.
For sure.
On the one hand, you have him as this advocate for personal freedom,
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have his political affiliations and his company's activities that are kind of at odds with that.
Right. And then it makes you think, well, okay, what are the motivations here?
Right.
And what kind of responsibility comes with having so much power and influence?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to Elon Musk.
Okay.
And his whirlwind over at X, formerly Twitter.
Yeah.
He came in really pushing this idea of a free speech utopia. But based on what we're seeing here, the reality seems a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely inconsistencies in what he's saying and what he's doing.
Right.
For example, blocking that podcast host, Rocco Rodriguez, for asking tough questions.
Right.
Reinstating accounts that were previously banned, like Donald Trump's, and then removing the block feature altogether.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like those actions are done more on impulse than strategy.
Right.
And what impact they have on creating a healthy digital public sphere is debatable. And then there's this elephant in the room that we have to address.
Oh, yeah.
Misinformation.
Yeah.
Musk said that he wanted to combat bots and spam.
Right.
But some people say that the problem has actually only gotten worse since he took over.
Right, and that's led to a more hostile environment online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's difficult to actually measure the exact impact.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of sources in here, articles, studies, even reports from organizations like Mashable and NBC News that indicate there's been this surge in misinformation.
Yeah.
And the environment online has become a lot more hostile since Musk took over.
Absolutely.
And then you also have to look at his leadership style.
Right.
Which I think a lot of people would describe as chaotic.
Yeah.
At least.
To say the least.
There have been mass layoffs. The platform's instability advertisers jumping ship. It doesn't really give you a sense of stability.
It makes you wonder about the future of X.
Right.
And Musk's decision-making in general.
Yeah.
Can he handle all this power?
Right, because it's not just a social media company.
Yeah.
It's a platform for information and public discourse.
Yeah, good global.
That has a global reach. So it's a huge responsibility, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
Speaking of responsibility and potential impact, these sources mention Rocco Rodriguez, who has a pretty pessimistic view of social media, especially platforms like X. He even calls it Sarmageddon.
Sarmageddon.
The idea that these platforms make the worst parts of human behavior even worse.
Right. And his perspective is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's like the total opposite of this techno-optimism that we see from people like Musk and Thiel. He's saying that social media isn't just a tool.
Right.
It's this powerful force that is shaping our behavior, our relationships, even how we see the world.
He doesn't paint a very pretty picture.
No.
He says it's like we're stuck in this never-ending high school drama.
Yeah, just seeking validation and attention.
Constantly. He also criticizes how online content is commodified.
Yes.
Where the platforms profit off the users.
Yeah.
Especially marginalized groups like sex workers.
Right.
Without really compensating them fairly or protecting them as creators.
Right. And that lack of transparency and those unfair compensation models really make you think about exploitation.
Right.
Like who's really benefiting from how things are now. Yep. Rodriguez suggests we should be trying to find other ways to engage with each other and create outside of these platforms.
Right.
So we can break free from what he calls algorithmic control.
So instead of doom scrolling, we should be more mindful of how we use these platforms and be wary of what the downsides could be.
Exactly. We have to remember that tension we were talking about.
Right.
The allure of freedom versus the reality of control in our digital lives.
Okay, so to recap, we've got Thiel's Palantir, which could be used for good.
Right.
But we're concerned about the lack of transparency. And then you have Musk, who claims to be this champion for free speech, but what he says and what he does and how that platform is going don't really line up.
It seems like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, we are.
I mean, we haven't even gotten to Thiel's book, The Diversity Myth, yet.
Okay, so let's get into that. What insights can we gain from it, and how does it tie in with this whole conversation about big tech freedom and control?
Oh.
Okay, so let's dive into this diversity myth thing.
Right.
What's the main point they're making, and how does it connect to Thiel's worldview?
So the diversity myth, it definitely presents a unique perspective. Thiel and David Sachs, his co-author, they say that true diversity isn't just about checking boxes or like having a certain demographic balance.
Okay.
It's about having diversity of thought, challenging the status quo, and embracing intellectual risk-taking.
Which makes sense when you think about Thiel's own path. He went to Stanford, he was a chess prodigy, and then he became a venture capitalist who made billions by taking chances on ideas that other people thought were crazy.
Yeah, he definitely isn't afraid to go against the grain. But that's where things get a little interesting, because you have this inherent tension. On the one hand, he's all about having this open marketplace of ideas, challenging what he sees as this politically correct culture that he thinks is stifling creativity.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, he's building these companies like Palantir that give governments and corporations so much power to like surveil and control information.
It's like he wants to create this world where the intellectual elite get to kind of steer the ship.
Right.
While everyone else is just trying to figure out this crazy, complex digital world that they created.
And that brings up a big question. Who benefits from that kind of future? Is it really about giving power to individuals?
Right.
Or is it more about keeping power in the hands of a select few?
It's something to think about. You know, one thing I noticed when going through all these sources was how many jokes there are about Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them are brutal, like making fun of the accidents that have happened with Tesla's autopilot system.
I mean, humor can be a way to make a statement about society, right? Even if it seems harsh.
Oh, for sure.
Those jokes, they kind of show this underlying anxiety that people have about Musk's ambitions and what could happen if things go wrong.
Like that one joke where they said that Musk wants to send people to Mars because he's the most creative serial killer of all time.
Wow.
I know dark humor, but it makes you think.
Yeah, it does. It makes you wonder about putting so much faith in just one person.
Right.
Especially someone who is known for making big promises that they don't always keep.
And then there are all those jokes about his personal life.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like when he broke up with Grimes and everyone was saying they needed some space.
Right.
It's silly. But it points to this thing he does where the line between his personal whims and his business decisions gets really blurry.
And that's a little worrying when you remember how big his companies are and how much of an impact they could have.
Yeah.
It really shows how important it is to separate the person from the product and really look at the impact of the choices they make.
Okay, so we've got Thiel, this strategic thinker who has this vision of the future being shaped by just a select few.
Right.
And then we've got Musk, the impulsive innovator who seems to do things without always thinking about what will happen.
Right. And both of them, in their own way, are having a huge influence on the world of tech.
And they're also raising serious questions about freedom control and what our digital lives are going to look like in the future.
Exactly. What's interesting is how both of them believe in this idea of libertarianism.
Right.
But they go about it in such different ways.
How so?
Well, Musk, he's all about disrupting things,
Yeah.
breaking things to see what happens. He's impulsive, and often it seems like he's more interested in getting a reaction out of people than really thinking about the consequences.
Okay.
Seal, on the other hand, he's very calculated and strategic. He's playing the long game, investing in companies that fit into his grand vision for the future.
Right.
He doesn't really seem to care as much about public opinion. He's more focused on building the framework for a world that he wants to see.
And that's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It's not just about what Musk tweets or what companies Thiel decides to fund.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the systems they're building, the power structures they're supporting, and the future that they're shaping, whether we realize it or not.
It's like we're just blindly walking into some kind of digital dystopia, distracted by the latest shiny new tech and the promise of convenience.
Yeah.
While these tech giants are behind the scenes rewriting all the rules.
And that's exactly why we need to be aware that I question everything and demand transparency from those in power. Don't just accept what you're told. Dig deeper, make the connections, and figure out what kind of future you want to be a part of.
One thing that really stood out to me from all these sources is how much they emphasize staying informed and being critical of the information we see online.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with all this AI-generated content going around, it's getting harder and harder to separate fact from fiction.
Right.
You've got deepfakes articles written by AI social media algorithms that are designed to keep us glued to our screens whether the information is accurate or not.
It's a lot.
It's a minefield out there.
And it's not just about being informed, it's also about protecting ourselves.
Likely.
One of these articles talked about all these cybersecurity steps we could take, like using strong passwords.
Right.
Having two-factor authentication, even using those passkey systems.
All good things to do. But we also have to be vigilant about recognizing phishing attempts.
Right.
And being careful about who we trust online. These scams are getting more sophisticated as AI gets more sophisticated.
It's like we have to be just as cautious in the digital world as we are in the real world.
Exactly.
Don't share your personal information with anyone you don't know and trust.
Right.
And double check any requests for information by going through official channels.
Yeah.
And if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Words to live by in the digital age.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Right. We've talked about Thiel and his vision of a future run by an elite few, Musk and his kind of chaotic way of doing things,
right,
and Rodriguez, who's warning everyone about the dangers of our interconnected world.
Yeah.
So what now? What does it all mean for the average person who's not a tech CEO or a billionaire investor?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we're going to get into as we wrap up this deep dive.
So we've talked about these really powerful figures in tech, the systems that they're building, and all of the potential consequences of that. But what does it all actually mean for the average person just trying to exist in this digital age?
Well, it means understanding that online, nothing is really neutral. The digital landscape is being shaped by people's agendas and biases. And then you have these power dynamics at play from the people who are actually in control of these platforms that we use every single day.
Yeah, it's like we've been given these incredibly powerful tools, but we're just now figuring out what the rules are.
Right.
And it turns out not everyone's even playing by the same rules.
Exactly. And we can't forget about being critical of the information that's coming at us. We have to remember that even something as simple as a joke online can actually have a much deeper meaning and even influence how we see things.
And it's not just about knowing what's going on, but actually taking steps to protect ourselves, like with our digital security, and making sure that our information is safe and that we're not being manipulated or scammed.
Right. We can't just assume that these companies have our best interests at heart. We have to advocate for ourselves and demand that they're transparent and accountable and that they're operating ethically.
Yeah, it's our data, our privacy, our online experience.
Exactly.
We have a right to demand better.
Absolutely. And I think most importantly, we have to remember that our digital lives are only one part of our lives in general.
Right.
We can't let algorithms run the show and dictate our experiences and relationships and how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to focus on having meaningful connections in the real world and doing things that bring us joy and fulfillment outside of the digital space.
That's a good point. We do have more control than we realize.
Absolutely.
We can choose how we use technology, how much power we give it, and how much we let it influence our lives.
And that brings us to something that I found really interesting in the things you sent.
What's that?
This growing feeling of disillusionment that people are experiencing with this idea of a techno-utopia that Silicon Valley always used to be so obsessed with.
Oh, you mean the idea that technology is going to solve all our problems and create this perfect world?
Exactly. And it seems like now people are realizing that these tech giants aren't actually these benevolent saviors,
Yeah.
but they're actually really powerful entities with their own agendas and honestly sometimes questionable ethics.
Yeah, it's like we're finally seeing past this shiny facade of innovation.
Right.
And realizing some of the messier realities like data exploitation and algorithms manipulating us and our privacy being eroded.
And as disheartening as it might seem at first, this disillusionment is a good thing. Well, it means that we're starting to ask the tough questions and demand more accountability, and we're realizing that technology itself isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's just a tool that can be used in many different ways.
So where do we go from here? Do we keep going down this path of technology just advancing without any checks and balances where our data is always being collected and our attention is constantly being fought over?
Right, or do we create a new path?
Exactly.
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. And it's not about abandoning technology altogether,
right,
but it's about finding a better balance.
Yeah.
One where we're prioritizing human well-being and social justice and making sure that we're taking care of the environment.
It really does feel like we're at a crossroads here. The decisions that we make today about how we develop and use and regulate technology, they're going to have consequences for generations to come.
And that's why having these conversations is so important.
Yeah.
It's not about having all the answers. It's about giving you the tools you need to navigate this world that's always changing,
right,
to be able to ask the right questions, and ultimately decide what you want your own digital life to look like.
So we've really dug deep into the complexities of big tech, that weird paradox of freedom and control in our digital lives,
right,
and the huge responsibility that comes with having so much power and influence. But most importantly, we've highlighted your role in all of this.
Exactly. Yeah. Remember, the future isn't set in stone. The digital world is out there full of possibilities, but also full of challenges. And how we choose to move forward is up to us.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.